Hi, everybody. Here we are again, the Hollywood Progressive Tour crew to tell you about a play we saw last night. The play was One Moment of Freedom, playing at the Theater 40 in Beverly Hills, written by Marian Zola and directed by Linda Alsnauer. It features an 11-person cast, and it tells a real-life story of an enslaved woman who successfully sued for her freedom in 1781 in Massachusetts. This world premiere runs through August 26th. What'd you think, hon?
Did you mention the slave's name?
I did at the beginning, One Moment of Freedom.
The slave's name, not the play's name.
No, I didn't.
Her name is Elizabeth Freeman. And it's really important. I think it's kind of telling that her name somehow didn't get mentioned. I think that I'll talk about the play and the good things about the play. I love the venue. The set was great. I enjoyed, actually the acting was pretty darn good. But you and I saw this last night on the heels of seeing another production, which was a film, an independent documentary about the Armenian genocide. And the film that we saw was directed, produced, created by an Armenian woman. And it was so touching. The emotions that flowed from that film really impacted everyone who watched it. I don't think that, there was a person in the room who didn't have a question, who didn't just sit spellbound. So considering, given that we had just seen that film, and then the following day we go to see this play, what I found with the play was that it was really lacking in terms of touching people emotionally. It did not really invoke empathy for the slave whose name was Elizabeth Freeman, so much so that her name is not even mentioned by you, which is okay. It's really not about her. It's a story that could have easily have been picked up from Wikipedia. And so I don't know if you want to say more about that. I have a lot more to say, Mia, but you can just jump in and say something at any time.
No, yeah, I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement. It felt like a high school history 101 crash course about Elizabeth. Don't even want to say about Elizabeth Freeman, but about the evolving, the what was happening before the Civil War sort of thing. Like, it wasn't focused on the Black person in the play, even though it was her story. It was sort of a look at kind of what was going on around here, which was interesting. I agree with you, Sharon.
Yeah. So it kind of reminded me of about 10 years ago, a movie came out that starred Viola Davis and Octavia Spencer. It was called The Help. And at the time, Dick, you and I were going to a church where most of the congregation was white. And we enjoyed really great friendships there, and friends that we still have to this day. But the women had gone to see this movie, The Help. And they all told me, you've got to see it. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. You've got to see The Help. So we went to see The Help, and I was so deeply disappointed in The Help. The Help is the story. It's a fictional. I got a little blurb here. It says The Help is a historical fiction. It started out as a novel by an American author, Catherine Stockett, which published the book in 2009. It's the story about African Americans working in white households in Jackson, Mississippi during the early 1960s. And everybody knows the 1960s was sort of the height of the civil rights movement. It says it's the story about African Americans, but it really is not. It's the story told by a white person of what they observed in seeing African Americans, but it's not a story given from the African American perspective. It doesn't give the African American any voice in the story. And in fact, I wrote a piece about that after Dick and I, after we saw that movie. And 10 years after we saw it, Viola Davis came out and said that she regretted ever playing that role. And the reason that she cited for regretting ever playing the role is because she felt that the Black women in this story, which was supposed to be about Black women, that it wasn't about Black women at all. It was about white people's vision of Black women and what white people thought Black women felt. But it actually was written by a white woman. And so this is how this one moment of freedom comes across. It really lacks emotion, as opposed to what we experienced the night before. A film about the Armenian genocide, the horrors of the Armenian genocide, written, produced, directed by an Armenian woman.
Yeah, so I came away educated. I thought it was a fascinating story, a fascinating piece of history. I'm a big reader. I was modestly surprised that I did not know anything about this story. It's obviously a pivotal time in American history. This woman, her name is Bet, the enslaved woman is named Bet. She's played by Catherine Bruhier. She won her freedom in the Massachusetts courts. But as both of you said, I came away educated and interested, but not moved. It's like, and the crux of the story was really, and it's beautiful. It was a beautiful part of the play, and the play is well worth seeing. A beautiful part of the play was the court scene that had Bet, the enslaved woman, had the attorney Theodore Sedgwick that she recruits to represent her case. And the opposing attorney, David Noble, played by Jeffrey Winter, who is the life of the party. I mean, he as Ed Rampell, our reviewer, says, he chews up all the scenery in just the right way. Most exciting piece, and the climax of that is the jury rules in her favor. She gets her freedom. And then they tagged on 15, 20 minutes of more stories about her life that kind of took all the air out of the excitement. So it's beautifully acted. The staging is very nice. The play could have been cut by a third. There was a lot of details. I mean, what happened to Beth later on when she's free is interesting. It's a nice biography. We get to learn that she became a midwife and a nurse. Good stuff, but it's like, well, the dramatic highlight was that, and the whole buildup was to the lawsuit.
And that lawsuit led to Massachusetts not having any slaves. So Massachusetts and Vermont became the two of the original colonies that ended up not having any slaves, partly due to this lawsuit. So in a sense, she's an American hero, but no one knows her name. And there's a reason no one knows her name. There is this lack of empathy, this lack of caring about Black people. So how did that come to be? How does that become sort of a foundational aspect of America? It became a foundational aspect of America because in order for decent people to be able to sleep, to live with themselves, they had to put Black people in a second-tier system in order to think that it was okay to keep them chained, to keep them bound, to keep them locked to property, and then to benefit from the labor of those people. That was the only way that it was possible to do that, is to make them not even citizens, not second-class citizens, but literally property. And you see the legacy of that in the way that that play is laid out or presented to the audience. No empathy whatsoever for this woman. And in fact, in my ideal world, the men who were portrayed in this production, particularly the one who held her in bondage, he is presented as a gentleman, an upstanding gentleman. The slave loved him. Her daughter loved him. But yet at the same time, when she was asked how much did freedom mean to her, she said that if she had to choose between remaining a slave and being free. If that freedom meant that she only got to live one more minute, she'd take the freedom. So what does that tell you about how much she loved this man? And that's been the case pretty much with all slaves. They did not want to remain enslaved. It is not a natural position in life to be an adult and to have to take every direction from another adult for every single thing that you do.
So the successful legal argument hinged on the fact that the one side, represented by the enslavers, wanted to see slaves as strictly property. But the defense attorney successfully argued, and Beth herself argued, that, well, how can she be property when her husband, her black husband, went off to the Revolutionary War, was shot and killed? Property can't really fight in the war. And it was that's why that part of the play was really fascinating, really worth watching. I really enjoyed that part. I will say that they also make the point, well, this was 1781. Slavery didn't end till after the Civil War, and then we can argue that it hasn't totally ended then, but why was that 70 years before? And they said, well, in Massachusetts and Vermont and so forth, the enslaved were typically cooks, maids, nannies, drivers, whereas in the Deep South, where slavery was much more pervasive, it was laborers, I mean, brute force laborers in the huge rice fields and tobacco farms and cotton fields. And that was a much more brutal kind of slavery, much more tied into the economy of the region. And those enslavers were not giving up their property, what they called their property, without that Civil War.
Well, the vast majority of the wealth that was held at that time in this country was held in the South. It was the rich plantation owners that held the wealth. They were the 1% of that era. And of course, they were not going to give that up.
Absolutely not. No, this play was, like my dad was saying, and Sharon mentioned as well, this was sort of a lackluster delivery for an actually really important story. I learned so much about this person and what I could gather from, the big trial scene, which Mr. Noble's character was by far my favorite character. Yeah. Go ahead. No, you're good.
The lead of the play, Catherine Bruhier, she was excellent.
Fantastic.
She had some serious acting chops, and that came through loud and clear.
So the playwright is quite an experienced writer and screenwriter, but this was her first play. And it seemed like it was a third too long, and it had the third too many characters, and a third too many scenes, and a third too many wandering stories. I mean, the whole business about the enslaver, the colonel's daughter getting married. Okay, I mean, I don't think we needed that. You needed to draw this play up to the outcome of that trial, and then it could be said. It didn't have to be acted out that then she got a house and became a midwife. And I mean, that was kind of an afterthought, could have been in the program notes.
Yeah. But, for me, and I was attempting to say this, and I don't know if I got this part out. When I'm watching stories that are told about slavery, I think that we will finally have arrived when we don't show the enslaver as these gentlemen. And there was about 10 years ago, there was a lovely young woman. Her name was J.C. Dugard. She was kidnapped at 11 years old in Northern California, and she was held on the property of this sex offender and his wife. They held her for 19 years. She was in a shack, and from age 11 till age 14, she was kept handcuffed in this shack. He raped her repeatedly. She ended up giving birth to 2 children that he fathered. Her first child she gave birth to her first child alone in this shed at age 14. She was pregnant like for her whole 13th year. And just thinking about that poor child, it really does make me want to cry. This young woman lived not that far from San Francisco in this shack. This is not unlike what the slave experience was. Yet we have no empathy for these people. And imagine the PTSD that they experience. Now, J.C. Dugard, the young woman that I'm talking about that was held in bondage for 19 years, she was finally set free. But it came out that she was in handcuffs for 3 years, but at some point in her 20s, she came into the house. She would actually leave the home, she and the girls. But she was so traumatized by the whole horrible ordeal that she never really told anyone. And it was only until 2 guards at, I think it was
UC Berkeley.
It was at UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley saw her daughters with the father and thought that the daughters were acting strangely. They seemed to be exhibiting characteristics of children who had been sexually abused or somehow held against their wishes. And so these 2 women followed up and found out where this guy lived, and the police came and then they found J.C. Dugard. But imagine, now this, of course, the state was sued for $20 million and they were awarded $20 million for her being in bondage all that time. But we have 35 million Black people who the vast majority are descendants of slaves, descendants of people who suffered from PTSD, who never got anything. And I'm not saying I'm not making a case for reparations, but what I'm making a case for is empathy. So.
But that does touch on, I mean, so this play is important in that in the growing conversation around reparations, around recognition of African-American rights, and the opposition to it, the whole anti-woke campaign. This is another log on the fire. And if people learned about that case and the reasons for it and the reasons about it, so that makes it worthwhile to go see this play, I would say. Yes,
there's a lot to be learned by going to see this play. But as I said, now the person who kept J.C. Dugard locked up, I forget the guy's name, but can you imagine us talking about him and holding him in high esteem?
Gentleman. He treated her so kindly, though.
Yes, and she loved him. And the girl loved him.
She didn't run away, so she must enjoy being with him.
She must have. And I mean, he wasn't really all that bad. She did get to eat. So why on earth is he now serving time for 430 years? What is wrong with this country?
I had the pleasure of learning a new word after seeing the play that we saw yesterday, in lines with the sentences we were just speaking, and my brain has wiped it from my memory. Drapetomania. The psychologic condition, I put in the largest air quotes ever, where an enslaved person must have a mental disease if they choose to run away from their slave owners. That's the only explanation. What was it? My brain refuses to hold on to the word.
I mean, it was funny when I was showing it to you last night. You were like, huh? What?
I couldn't read the words in front of me. Still can't remember the word off the top of my head right now. My body refuses to acknowledge this word. Absolutely.
That cognitive dissonance, when you just really can't hold 2 conflicting thoughts in your mind at the same time, you've got to come up with a reasonable, rational explanation. And the explanation for these perfectly happy slaves running away is they must have a psychological disorder, a disorder that is called drapetomania.
Well, I think we're good. We're going to see Event this Saturday, and we'll report on this. So One Moment of Freedom plays through August 26th, plays 4 or 5 times a week at Theater 40 in Beverly Hills.
And I do appreciate that the writer Marian Zola took a stab at this. I would encourage her to take some of the bits of advice that we've given and inject some empathy into that play.
See you next time, folks.
Bye-bye.